The Giving Plague by David Brin. You think you're going to get me, don't you? Well, you got another thing coming, because I'm ready for you. That's why there's a forged card in my wallet saying my blood group is A negative, and a medical alert tag warning that I'm allergic to penicillin, aspirin, and phenylalanine. Another states that I'm a practicing devout Christian Scientist. All these tricks ought to slow you down when the time comes, as sure it's as it's sure to sometime soon. Even if it makes a difference between living and dying, there's just no way I'll let anyone stick a transfusion needle into my arm. Never. Not with the blood supply in the state it's in. And anyway, I've got antibodies. So just stay the hell away from me, Alice. I won't be your patsy. I won't be your vector. I know your weakness, you see. You're a fragile, if subtle devil. Unlike Tarp, you can't bear exposure to air, or heat, or cold, or acid, or alkali. Blood to blood, that's your only route. And what need had you of any other? You thought you'd evolved the perfect technique, didn't you? What was it Leslie Atchison called you? The perfect master, the paragon of viruses? I remember long ago when HIV, the AIDS virus, had everyone so impressed with its subtlety and effectiveness of design. But compared with you, HIV is just a crude butcher, isn't it? A maniac with a chainsaw. A blunderer that kills its host and relies for transmission on habits humans can, with some effort, get under control. Oh, old HIV. It had its tricks, but compared with you, it was an amateur. Rhinovirus and flu are clever too. They proliferate and mutate rapidly. Long ago, they learnt how to make their hosts drip and wheeze and sneeze, so the victims spread their misery in all directions. Flu viruses are a lot smarter than AIDS, because they don't generally kill their hosts. They just make them miserable, while they hack and spray and inflict fresh infections on their neighbors. Oh, Les Edgerton was always accusing me of anthropomorphizing our subjects. Whenever he came to my part of the lab, he found me cursing some damned intransigent lycophage in rich Tex-Mex invective. He'd react predictably. I can just picture him now, raising one eyebrow, commenting dryly in his Winchester accent. The virus can't hear you, Forey. It isn't sentient, nor even alive, strictly speaking. It's a little more than a packet of genes in a protein case, after all. Yeah, Les, I'd answer, but selfish genes. Given half a chance, they'll take over a human cell, force it to make armies of new viruses, then burst it apart as they escape to attack other cells. They may not think. All that behavior may have evolved by blind chance. But doesn't it feel as if it was planned? As if the nasty little things were guided somehow by somebody, or to make us miserable, out to make us die. Oh, come now, Forey, he would smile in my new world ingenuousness. You wouldn't be in this field if you didn't find phages beautiful in their own way. Good old smug, sanctimonious Les. He never did figure out viruses fascinated me for quite another reason. In their rapacious insatiability, I saw simple, distilled purity of ambition that exceeded even my own. The fact that it was mindless did little to ease mine. I've always imagined we humans overrated brains anyway. We'd first met when Les visited Austin on sabbatical some years before. He'd had the boy genius rep even then, and naturally I played up to him. He invited me to join him back in Oxford, so there I was, having regular amiable arguments over the meaning of disease while the English rain dripped desultorily on the rhododendrons outside. Les Addison, him with his artsy friends and his pretensions at philosophy, less all the time talking about the elegance and beauty of our nasty little subjects. But he didn't fool me. I knew he was just as crazy, Nobel mad as the rest of us, just as obsessed with the chase, searching for that piece of the life puzzle, that bit leading to more grants, more lab space, more techs, more prestige, leading to more money, status, and maybe eventually Stockholm. He claimed to be uninterested in such things, but he was a smoothie, all right. How else, in the midst of a Thatcher massacre of British science, did his lab keep expanding? And yet, he kept up the pretense. Viruses have their good side, Les kept saying. Sure, they often kill in the beginning. All new pathogens start that way. But eventually, one of two things happens. Either humanity evolves defenses to eliminate the threat, or, oh, he loved those dramatic pauses, or, I'd prompt him as required, or we come to an accommodation, a compromise, even an alliance. That's what Les always talked about, symbiosis. He loved to quote Margulis and Thomas, and even Lovelock, for pity's sake. His respect, even for vicious, sneaky brutes like the HIV, was downright scary. See how it actually incorporates itself into the DNA of its victims? He would muse. Then it waits until the victim is later attacked by some other disease pathogen. Then the host T cells prepare to replicate, to drive off the invader, only now, some cells, chemical machinery, is taken over by the new DNA, and instead of 2 new T cells, a plethora of new AIDS viruses results. So, I answered, except that it's a retrovirus. That's the way nearly all viruses work. Yes, but think ahead, Forey. Imagine what's going to happen when, inevitably, the AIDS virus infects someone whose genetic makeup makes him invulnerable. What, you mean like his antibody reactions are fast enough to stop it? Or his T-cells repel invasion? Oh, Les, to sound so damn patronizing when he got so excited. No, think, he urged. I mean invulnerable after infection, after the viral genes have incorporated into his chromosomes. Only this individual, certain other genes prevent the new DNA from triggering viral synthesis. No new viruses are made. No cellular disruption. The person is invulnerable. But now he has all this new DNA. In just a few cells. Yes, but suppose if one of these is a sex cell, then suppose he fathers a child with the gamete, and every one of that child's cells may contain both the trait of the invulnerability and the new viral genes. Think about it, Forey. You know, a new type of human being, one who cannot be killed by AIDS, and yet he has all the AIDS genes, can make all those strange, marvelous proteins. Oh, most of them will be unexpressed or useless, of course, but now this child's genome and his descendants contains more variety. I often wondered, when he got carried away this way, did he actually believe he was explaining this to me for the first time? Much of the Brits respect American science. They do tend to assume we're slackers when it comes to philosophical side. But I'd seen his interest heading into this direction weeks back and had carefully done some extra reading. You mean like the genes responsible for some types of inheritable cancers? I asked sarcastically. There's evidence some oncogenes were originally inserted into the human genome by viruses. just as you suggest. Those who inherit the trait of rheumatoid arthritis may also have gotten their gene that way. Exactly. Those viruses themselves may be extinct, but their DNA lives on in ours. Right, and boy, have human beings benefited. Oh, how I hated the smug expression he'd get. It got wiped off his face eventually, didn't it? Les picked up a piece of chalk and drew a figure on the blackboard. Harmless is to killer, is to survivable illness, is to inconvenience, is to harmless. Here's the classic way of looking how a host species interacts with a new pathogen, especially a virus. Each arrow, of course, represents a stage of mutation and adaptation selection. First, the new form of some previously harmless microorganism leaps from its prior host, say a monkey species or a bat, or to a new one, say us. Of course, at the beginning, we have no adequate defenses. It cuts through us like syphilis did in Europe in the 16th century, killing in days rather than years. In an orgy of self-feeding that's really not a very efficient modus for a pathogen. After all, only a gluttonous parasite kills off its host so quickly. What follows then? A rough period for both host and parasite, as each struggles to adapt to the other. It can be likened to warfare. Or, on the other hand, it might be thought of as a sort of drawn-out process of negotiation. I snorted in disgust. Mystical crap, Les. I'll concede your chart, but the war analogy is the right one. That's why they'll fund labs like this one, to come up with better weapons for our side. Possibly. But sometimes the process does look different for you. He turned and drew another chart. Harmless is to killer, is to survivable illness, is to inconvenience, is to one or the other benign parasitism or clumsy incorporation, or symbiosis and beneficial incorporation. You can see that this chart is the same as the other, right up to the point where the original disease appears, or goes into hiding. Surely as E. coli took refuge in our innards. Doubtless, long ago, the ancestors of E. coli killed a great many of our ancestors before eventually becoming the beneficial symbionts they are now, helping us digest our food. The same applies to viruses, I'd wager. Heritable cancers and rheumatoid arthritis are just temporary awkwardness. Eventually, those genes will be comfortably incorporated. They'll be part of the genetic diversity that prepares us to meet challenges ahead. Why, I'd wager a large portion of our present genes came about in such way, entering our cells first as invaders.